So on this petticoat, I'm using a really tiny stitch. It's 1.5, almost 2, so 1 3/4, I guess. It's a really tiny stitch. I find that I really like the tiny stitches for the top of anything that is going to show. I just happen to really like how it looks. I think it's tidy and precise and neat. I'll use like a 2 or 3 for inside seams, but for the outside, I really like this tiny stitch. Okay, so I have discovered a problem with my pattern, and this is what I think Bob Ross would call there are no accidents, there are only happy, or there are no mistakes, there are only happy accidents. So when I adjusted my pattern, I don't know what I was thinking, honestly. Last night was a little interesting. So instead of having a smooth circle, I have a V. And I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my pattern pieces as best as I can. There's a little variation here. Do I have the marked sides together? Yeah, I do. Okay, so they are correct, lined up anyway, but I'm not lining up exactly right, and that's okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play with the curve in chalk. Now I happen to know that it should match the curve at the bottom, ideally. But I'm going to play with it a little bit. We're going to see what we get. Because I think that I can get a pretty good curve here. There we go. I think that's better. Yep, I'm gonna go with that. I left my pin cushion downstairs on the table and I'm too lazy to go get it. I'll double check on the length. Before I cut anything, I'm going to double check on the length. Because I want to make sure that I have the full 76 inches and that the hem lines up. I think it's going to. "76 centimeters, I'm sorry. Oh yeah. We're good there. It's a little longer there, but I think it'll be okay. Okay, I think we're good. I'm not gonna measure all of it since I know that it's pretty much the same. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to sew up the side, and I don't do this kind of French seam very often because I don't like the way it lays. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the normal French seam that I normally do, which is sewing it on the wrong side and then trimming one side of the seam, folding it over and sewing it down on the top. And you'll see what I mean because I'll show you. But I like that type of French seam better. They're both correct. You know, it's not that one is more correct than the other. I do need to trim this. I made the second mistake when I cut out my pattern. Again, I don't know what I was thinking, but you see where this doesn't line up? I didn't put a seam allowance on my little triangle when I cut it out yesterday. I don't know what I was thinking, but I didn't do that. So now I have to true it up, but I am going to true it up in kind of a different way, I guess. Well, no, I think I'll straighten it out. There we go. So I'm gonna sew that together. So we start with pressing the threads into the fabric. You notice I'm not rubbing it, I'm just pressing it lightly. I don't have it on a really high heat. So we start there. I'm gonna take all the pins out of this waistband so I can open it up. Sorry about the fan, but I'm roasting in my art room tonight. I wore my wool petticoat as a skirt because it was really cold this morning. Mistake. But now I can't get to my closet because my partner's asleep. Okay, so see this seam? It's been pressed. What we're gonna do is we're gonna cut one side of it down. Now, I really need to get my scissors sharpened. Those of you that are watching this that have really sharp scissors, just know that eventually they get dull. Okay, so I have a seam like this. What I like to do is I pull the other side taut and I iron the seam over. The other thing I'm going to do is see this, I still have to fold this tiny bit over. So I want to really make sure that this is really out of the way. There we go. Get that out of the way. Okay. I don't need this much to fold over. It'll create a really big seam. So I'm just gonna trim it down a little bit. You don't have to worry about it being even. Matter of fact, obviously I'm not even caring whether or not it's even or not. I just wanna reduce the bulk in the seam. Okay. Again. Now, what I like to do is flip it over, and I want to look at it from the other side because I'm going to top stitch from this side, and I want to make sure that it's ironed as flat as possible because sometimes, not all the time, but occasionally I find that sometimes the French seam on the showing side, there's a little bit of a buckle in it. And I don't want that to happen on this one. Okay, now I like to do it from this side so I can curl it over this side. It doesn't matter, but I like to curl away from me. And I use my nail and I curl it over. I should probably show you a little bit closer. Maybe with more light, if I can find a light. Nope. This is the light we have. I'm gonna try a different light. Oh, that's a little bit better. Okay. So we take it and we fold it over and tuck it under. So fold and tuck. And then I usually press a little bit as I go. Silk is really good for memory. Remembers what you want it to do. So if you're careful with it, you don't actually have to pin it. That's a little wobbly, but that's okay. Fold and tuck. You know, my very first French seam was I folded it over and I just sewed it down. I didn't tuck anything because the book that I was learning from, they didn't describe it very well. I think I must have read that book about 15 times about French seams, and I just sewed them all down, and then there was that shredded edge, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why I was doing it wrong. Well, I was flat felling. I wasn't actually doing a French seam. Now, there are several different ways of doing French seams, obviously, and I've done 2 different kinds on this one. I've done this one, and now I'm doing this one. But I will tell you that the first time I did an actual proper French seam, it was like the light bulb from the aha moment in Monty Python's Holy Grail, and you have the God in the sky, oh, right? Oh my God. Yeah, that right there. Now the tiny ones are a little tricky. You just gotta be patient with them. If you iron it a little bit as you go along, when you get to the sewing machine, you can like fold it over and sew as you go. So that's pretty much what I'm gonna do. And then I will show you as I sew it. Now I'm right-handed. So you lefties might wanna try it a different way, but this is the way I like to do it. So I fold my fabric in, crease it a little bit, and silk remembers. It's kind of like linen. It'll remember what you tell it to do. That is, if I can get my fingers to cooperate with me today. Now I want a small stitch on this because this is going to show on the outside. Now I don't know if it's cheating or not, but I totally use my nails to curl it under and then sew a little bit. There we go. See, if you can see that. So I use my nail and I curl the fabric in. Then I sew a little bit. Okay, so I curl it in. I'm not worried about those silk fibers coming out of the fabric because I can go back and trim those. They aren't gonna fray anymore because I'm sewing the whole buggery thing down. Now this is where you have multiple seams that are meeting, so you just gotta be a little bit more careful. Go slow. There you go. Something that also helps it not pucker on the other side is you're kind of pulling away here and pulling away here as well as sewing down. I am being conscientious that the seam at the bottom is smaller than the seam at the top, so I didn't worry about making sure that they're the same size. It really doesn't matter. I'm actually trying to conserve fabric as I go. So I don't want to waste anything. That chalk line is telling me kind of where I'm at. Now remember, that chalk line was because I had an uneven thing going on. That's okay. You notice I didn't take it off or anything. It's not getting in my way. It doesn't disturb what I'm doing. I have a little bit extra fabric in that seam. So just tuck it under. It's not going to shred. I mean, anything that's outside your seam might shred a little bit over time, but it's on the inside. It's not like it's on the outside, and it'll keep your, I mean, it won't interfere with any of the rest of the fabric shredding because everything else is encased in this French seam. And honestly, I'm not the most tidy sewist, and I'm not worried about that. It's not a competition to me. Okay, so we have a really nice tidy seam there. Isn't that pretty? And it's tidy on this side, it's tidy on that side. Hooray! I eyeball it when I gather it up into the petticoat, and that works for me. If you want to do a double line of gather stitches and do them evenly, it is entirely up to you. I prefer to eyeball it. I know that I kind of want most of my gather kind of from the side hit back. Mostly because I just don't want so much bulk at the front. I already have a belly. The style that I normally wear is kind of something that accentuates the butt, and I definitely have a butt, so it's kind of the direction I go with my gathers. There we go. The other thing that I do is I kind of clip threads as I go, because I'm notorious for not clipping threads with the machine. I'm in a hurry. I also don't line it up exactly. I push it in a little bit because I know that I'm going to want overlap for the closure. So I find my middle bit there. I line it up with the kind of middle bit here. And then a little middle here. Middle here. And we're on a curve, so for the most part, it gathers in pretty nicely. You notice that it mostly fits in. I'm not having a lot of gathering, and I did that on purpose. The style that I normally wear has more fabric at the bottom of the skirt, so that's why I want to put ruffles on this. And as you heard my conundrum earlier, I wasn't sure if I wanted to put ruffles before or after the yoke, but I decided that I'll just do them after, but I wanted to finish the yoke and get that done and out of the way. Except closures, I won't put closures on yet. And I'll do that seam very last. There we go. Again, I'm not really worried about it being even. I just realized that I told you all the gathers are going in the back, but this is the front. So what I mean is, never you mind. I think you figured it out, but I'm gonna sew the yoke on and then I'll be back. Okay. So I'm gonna take all of the... I also shortened my stitch, so my stitch is at a 2, which is kind of my average normal stitch. I am going to do a top stitch on this petticoat all along the bottom of the yoke. I'm going to pull these pins out and then I'm going to iron it. And after well, let me rephrase that. I'm going to press it because I want to press the stitches into the fibers of the silk, that it remembers, and then we'll see what's next. Okay, so now we're going to finish the yoke. Now, this is the yoke piece, and this is the skirt. I need to make sure that the skirt piece is ironed into the yoke. I have my iron on a kind of a cooler setting than what I normally use, but I'm just going to help it remember. I'm going to go around before I clip, because I am going to clip. Now you take a pair of snips, and I usually clip kind of the middle of the curve here. You want to make sure you don't clip your stitches, so you got to know which stitches. I have a larger running stitch going here, so I can clip that, but I can't clip my actual sewing stitches. See that nice curve? I want to make sure I clip around the curve. It just helps it behave better. Okay. I'm not used to the camera sitting there. Okay. So now you turn it over. Or I like to turn it over. And I can feel where the hem is, like where the fabric is. And I'm just gonna press again. A little bit of iron in there. There we go. Do it on this side. One side is a lot prettier than the other, I noticed. That's okay. Okay. Now, this is where silk taffeta, so I pin it to the board. It's kind of a trick I figured out when I was working with silk taffeta before on another project, is that sometimes you got to help it behave a little bit, or it's going to slide around on you and then you're going to get really frustrated. Okay, I start in the middle and I pin it. Don't pin it to your board. So a trick you can do is I have one of these big rulers. And it'll keep you from stabbing into your ironing board. Now on the yoke, because I'm right-handed, I know that I'm actually not gonna see this side when I sew. I'm gonna sew from the outside. Couple things that's gonna make it really tidy looking from the outside. But the other thing is that because I'm not gonna see it, it's really important that I kind of pay attention to where the stitches are underneath. Like where I'm pinning it here, because I don't want to accidentally miss the hem. You know, like sew over here instead of actually on the hem or on the casing. Depends on how, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So I pick my deep curve first. So where it's really deeply curved, I try to get that kind of first. So I'm ignoring the big stitches. That was my initial tacking stitch. I'm missing that. I don't care about that stitch. What I care about is the tiny stitches, so they're a different size. Okay, I can unpin this. Now I want to figure out this. Ooh. The iron on and my light's on. It's really warm in here. think I'm gonna try to see how many Patreon people sign up, but my hope is that I can get some track lighting put in here so that I have better lighting for my videos. Goals, right? Goals. Okay, so now we're gonna work on the other side. Get my ruler kind of out of the way. See how the silk kind of just remembers? So if you're really careful with it, or not really careful, but if you're just mindful of how silk behaves, it does a lot of wonderful stuff and it'll behave for you quite nicely. Every time I use this yoke pattern, I'm like, maybe I should use a 5/8 inch seam, because I always use a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm like, that would give me so much more fabric in my yoke, but then I forget. I'm also using really fine tip pins so that the holes will disappear after I sew and iron. Okay. I'm also curling the silk up because that iron is hot and I don't want to scorch my fabric by accident. Having done that before, let's see if we can angle it better for you. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to actually start my stitching up here on the opposite side because I want to connect these stitches all the way around. Okay.